Rachel had always dreamed of owning an old house. Not just any old house, but one with character, with history, with stories embedded in its walls. When she first saw the Victorian house on Maple Street, she knew it was the one. Sure, it needed work. The paint was peeling, the garden was overgrown, and the real estate agent had been honest about the plumbing issues. But there was something about it that felt right, like the house had been waiting for her. Moving day had been chaos. Boxes everywhere, furniture that didn't quite fit through doorways, and her cat hiding under the bed for hours. But 3 months later, she'd finally settled in. The house was starting to feel like home. She'd painted the living room a soft cream color, fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, and even tackled some of the garden. Every day brought a new discovery. A beautiful original tile hidden under old linoleum, intricate woodwork beneath layers of paint, small treasures that made her fall more in love with the place. The master bedroom was her favorite room. It had huge bay windows that let in the morning sun, creating golden pools of light on the hardwood floor. She'd set up her bed facing those windows so she could wake up to natural light. It was perfect except for one thing, that annoying creaking floorboard. At first, she barely noticed it. Old houses make noise, right? They settle, they shift, they have their quirks. But this particular board right near the foot of her bed seemed louder than the others. Every morning when she got up, it would let out this long, drawn-out creak that seemed to echo through the room. She'd step around it, make a mental note to fix it someday, and go about her morning routine. Her friends thought she was crazy for buying such an old house. "Why didn't you just get something new?" they'd ask. Something where everything works and nothing creaks. But Rachel loved the imperfections. She loved knowing that other people had lived here, had walked these same floors, had looked out these same windows. Sometimes late at night, she'd imagine what life had been like for them. What did they wear? What did they talk about? What made them laugh? One Saturday afternoon, Rachel decided it was time to rearrange the bedroom. She'd been thinking about it for weeks. Maybe if she moved the dresser to the other wall, the room would feel more spacious. She'd invited her sister over to help, but at the last minute, her sister had canceled. Something about her daughter's soccer game. So Rachel was on her own. She started by pushing the bed away from the windows. It was heavier than she expected, and she had to stop and catch her breath halfway through. That's when it happened. As she stepped back to survey her work, her foot caught on something. That creaking floorboard. But this time, instead of just creaking, it moved. Actually lifted up. She stumbled, caught herself on the dresser, and looked down. The board was completely loose now, one end sticking up like it was waving at her. She could see the dark space underneath, the gap between the floor and whatever was below. Her heart started beating faster. Not from fear exactly, but from something else. Excitement, maybe. Curiosity, definitely. Rachel knelt down and gently lifted the board free. It came away easily, the old nails barely holding it in place anymore. She set it aside and peered into the darkness below. The smell of old wood and dust hit her immediately. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the space between the floor joists. At first, she couldn't see much. Just dust particles dancing in the light. Cobwebs stretched between wooden beams, the kind of emptiness you'd expect under an old floor. She was about to replace the board, feeling slightly disappointed, when something caught her eye. There, wedged between two beams, pushed far back like someone had wanted to hide it, was something wrapped in what looked like old darkened cloth. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a shoebox, but it was definitely there. Someone had put it there deliberately. You don't accidentally drop something that size between floor joists. Rachel's mind raced with possibilities. What could it be? How long had it been there? Who had hidden it? She lay flat on her stomach, reaching her arm down into the space, her fingers stretched, just barely brushing the edge of the package. Not quite. She adjusted her position, reaching deeper, her shoulder pressing against the rough edge of the floorboard. Finally, her fingers closed around the cloth. It was heavier than she expected, much heavier. She pulled carefully, not wanting to tear the old fabric. The package scraped against the wooden beam as she maneuvered it toward the opening. Dust showered down, making her cough. But she kept pulling, slowly, steadily, until finally the package was free. Rachel sat up, holding her discovery in both hands. Her heart was pounding now, really pounding. The cloth was some kind of oilcloth, stiff with age and covered in decades of dust. It was tied with old twine that looked like it might disintegrate if she touched it wrong. The whole thing felt fragile, like a piece of history that had been preserved by accident. She stood up, cradling the package carefully, and walked over to the window where the light was better. Now she could see it more clearly. The oilcloth was dark with age, but you could still see hints of a pattern on it, like it had once been decorative. The twine was wrapped around it several times, tied in a knot that had probably been tight once but was now loose and crumbling. For a moment, Rachel just stood there, holding this mysterious package, wondering what to do. Should she open it right here? Should she take it somewhere else? What if it was something fragile that would fall apart the moment she unwrapped it? What if it was something valuable? What if it was something dangerous? She thought about calling someone. Her sister, maybe. Or her friend Tom, who was always up for an adventure. But something stopped her. This felt personal somehow, like a secret that had been kept for a very long time, and she was the first person to discover it. Opening it alone felt right. Rachel made a decision. She'd take it downstairs to the kitchen where the light was best and the table was big enough to spread everything out. Whatever this was, whatever story it held, she was about to discover it. As she carefully made her way down the stairs, package held close to her chest, she couldn't help but smile. This was exactly why she'd bought an old house, for moments like this, for mysteries waiting to be solved, for connections to the past. The afternoon sun was streaming through the kitchen windows as she set the package down on the table. She pulled out a chair and sat down, staring at it for a long moment. Then very gently she began to untie the crumbling twine. This was it. Whatever had been hidden under her bedroom floor for who knows how many years was about to be revealed. And somehow, Rachel knew that once she opened it, everything would change. The twine fell away in pieces as Rachel worked it loose. Her hands were shaking slightly, though she wasn't sure if it was from excitement or nervousness. Maybe both. She'd watched enough movies to know that hidden packages could contain anything. Treasure secrets, things people wanted to stay buried. But this was real life, not a movie. And she was about to find out what someone had thought important enough to hide beneath their floorboards. The oilcloth unfolded stiffly, resisting at first, then giving way with small cracking sounds. Inside was a metal box, surprisingly clean considering where it had been. It was maybe 10 inches long and 6 inches wide, made of some kind of tin or steel that had held up remarkably well over the years. There was a simple latch on the front, rusted but still intact. Rachel ran her fingers over the surface of the box. It was cool to the touch and had a few dents and scratches, signs of age and use. Someone had owned this box, had touched it, had decided what to put inside it. She tried the latch, but it wouldn't budge. Rust had essentially welded it shut. She didn't want to force it and risk damaging whatever was inside. She got up and rummaged through her kitchen drawers until she found a small screwdriver. Back at the table, she carefully worked the tip under the edge of the latch, applying gentle pressure. Nothing. She tried again, wiggling it slightly. Still nothing. On the third try, with a bit more force, she heard a crack. The rust gave way and the latch popped open so suddenly that she nearly dropped the screwdriver. Rachel took a deep breath. This was it. She lifted the lid slowly, half expecting it to be empty or full of nothing but more dust. But what she saw made her gasp out loud. The box was packed full of papers, and sitting right on top was a photograph. Rachel picked it up carefully, holding it by the edges. It was black and white, or maybe sepia-toned, the kind of photo from decades ago. A young woman stood on a porch that Rachel recognized immediately because it was the front porch of this very house. The woman was beautiful, dressed in clothes that looked like they were from the 1940s, a fitted dress with padded shoulders, heels, her hair styled in those perfect waves that women wore back then. But it was her expression that caught Rachel's attention. The woman was smiling, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was sad somehow, like she was trying to be brave about something. Rachel set the photo aside and looked at the papers. They were letters, dozens of them, all tied together with a faded pink ribbon. She untied the ribbon carefully and picked up the first letter. The paper was thin, the kind used during wartime when materials were scarce. The handwriting was neat and flowing, written in fountain pen ink that had faded to a rusty brown. "My dearest Helen," it began. Rachel's eyes widened. She was holding someone's love letter. A real love letter from what looked like 70 or 80 years ago. She kept reading. "I'm writing this from somewhere I can't name, doing things I can't talk about. But I think about you every moment. I think about the last time I saw you standing on your porch, trying not to cry as I walked away. I promised I'd come back to you, and I will. I swear I will." It was signed simply, Yours always, James. Rachel felt a lump forming in her throat. This was real. These were real people, real feelings, real promises made in a time when the world was at war. She picked up another letter, then another. They were all from James to Helen, written over a span of what looked like several years. Each one was filled with longing, with hope, with plans for a future together. But there was something else in the box. Beneath the letters was a small leather journal, worn and soft with age. Rachel opened it carefully. The same flowing handwriting filled the pages, but these were Helen's words, not James's. The journal entries were dated, starting in 1943. Rachel began to read, and as she did, a story unfolded that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Helen had fallen in love with James, a soldier, but there was a problem. She was already engaged to another man, someone her family approved of, someone stable and established, a banker named Richard. Her parents had arranged it all, thought they were setting their daughter up for a good life. But then Helen had met James at a dance, and everything changed. The journal entries described their secret meetings, stolen moments, the way her heart would race whenever she saw him. She wrote about how torn she felt, trapped between duty and desire, between what her family expected and what her heart wanted. Mother says Richard will give me everything I need, one entry read. A nice house, security, respectability. But she doesn't understand that none of that matters without love. When I'm with James, I feel alive. When I'm with Richard, I feel like I'm playing a part in someone else's story. Rachel turned the pages, completely absorbed. The entries grew more desperate as time went on. James had been deployed overseas. Helen wrote about waiting for his letters, about how each day without word from him felt like a year. She wrote about Richard's growing impatience, about the wedding her mother was planning, about the pressure closing in from all sides. Then Rachel found an entry that made her stomach drop. It was dated December 1945. James is gone. They sent a telegram to his mother 3 days ago. Missing in action, presumed dead somewhere in France. I can't breathe. I can't think. Richard knows about the letters somehow. I don't know how he found out, but he confronted me yesterday. He was angry, but not the way I expected. He didn't yell. He just looked at me with these cold eyes and said that we would never speak of this again, that I would marry him as planned and we would have a proper life together, and I would forget about James. Rachel had to stop reading for a moment. She looked up, blinking back tears. This woman, Helen, had lived in this house, had walked on these floors, looked out these windows, slept in that bedroom upstairs, and she'd carried this grief, this lost love in secret. She kept reading. Helen had decided to hide everything that reminded her of James. The letters, the journal, the photograph. She wrote about prying up the loose floorboard in her bedroom, the same board that Rachel had stumbled on all these years later. She'd wrapped everything in oilcloth and hidden it away. Maybe someday I'll be brave enough to take them out again, Helen had written. Maybe someday I'll tell the truth about who I really loved. But not now. Now I have to survive. I have to put on a smile and become Mrs. Richard Pemberton and live the life everyone expects me to live. But there was more in the box. Rachel reached in and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was jewelry, a brooch with tiny pearls, a delicate ring, a pair of earrings, and a gold locket. Rachel opened the locket with trembling fingers, and there he was. James, a young man in a military uniform, handsome and serious, staring at the camera with determined eyes. Rachel sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. She was holding pieces of someone's life, someone's broken heart, someone's buried truth. Helen had hidden these treasures away, and for some reason she'd never come back for them. Why? What had happened? Had she ever found happiness? Had she spent her whole life thinking about the man in the photograph? Rachel looked at the photo of Helen again, really looked at it this time. That sad smile made sense now. This picture had been taken right before or right after James left. Helen was trying to be strong, trying to hold it together, but you could see the pain behind her eyes if you looked closely enough. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the kitchen table. Rachel realized she'd been sitting here for over an hour, lost in someone else's story. But it didn't feel like someone else's story anymore. It felt personal. Helen had lived in this house, had hidden this box in this house, and now Rachel had found it. There had to be a reason. Maybe Helen had wanted someone to find it eventually. Maybe she'd wanted her story to be told. Rachel gathered everything carefully and placed it back in the metal box. She needed to know more. She needed to find out what happened to Helen, to James, to all of them. This wasn't just a discovery anymore. It was a mystery that needed solving, a story that deserved to be finished. Rachel couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Helen's face in that photograph, that sad smile that now made perfect sense. She kept thinking about the letters, about James's promises to come home, about Helen's heartbreak when he never did. Around 2 a.m, she gave up on sleep entirely and went downstairs to make tea. The metal box sat on her kitchen table where she'd left it. Rachel found herself opening it again, carefully taking out the photograph and studying it by the dim light of her kitchen lamp. Helen had been so young, probably early 20s, her whole life ahead of her, and yet she'd been forced to bury the person she really loved and marry someone else. Had she ever been happy? Had Richard been kind to her at least? How long had she lived in this house, walking over that floorboard every day knowing what was hidden beneath it? By morning, Rachel had made a decision. She was going to find out what happened to Helen Pemberton. The town had a historical society. She'd seen it when she first moved here. A small building on Main Street with a sign that said they kept records of local families, old newspapers, photographs. If Helen had lived here for years, there had to be some trace of her. After a quick shower and 2 cups of coffee, Rachel grabbed the metal box and headed out. The Historical Society didn't open until 10, so she stopped at the library first. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes and reading glasses on a chain, pointed her toward the local history section. Rachel spent an hour going through old records before she found it. A marriage announcement from 1946 in the local newspaper. Miss Helen Hartwell wed Mr. Richard Pemberton in a quiet ceremony at St. Augustine Church. The couple will reside at 412 Maple Street. That was Rachel's address, her house, so Helen had married Richard after all, just like she'd said she would in her journal. Rachel felt a pang of sadness reading those words. Quiet ceremony. It sounded so formal, so loveless. Not the wedding Helen had probably dreamed about when she was writing those letters to James. At exactly 10 o'clock, Rachel walked into the Historical Society. A bell chimed above the door, and a woman looked up from behind a desk cluttered with papers and old books. She was probably in her 70s with silver hair pulled back in a bun and a warm smile. "Good morning, dear. Can I help you with something?" Rachel approached the desk, suddenly feeling nervous. "Hi, yes. I'm hoping you can help me find information about someone who used to live in my house. Her name was Helen Pemberton." The woman's eyes lit up with interest. "Oh, you're researching your house history? How wonderful. Let me see what we have. Pemberton, you said?" "Yes, Helen Pemberton. She would have lived there from around 1946, maybe longer." The woman stood up and moved to a filing cabinet. Pemberton, she murmured, flipping through folders. Here we are. Richard and Helen Pemberton. Yes, I remember this family. Well, I don't remember them personally. I'm not quite that old, she laughed. But they were well known in town. She pulled out a thick folder and brought it to a table, gesturing for Rachel to sit. Richard Pemberton was on the city council for many years. Quite prominent. His wife Helen was involved in various charities, though by all accounts she was a very private person. Rachel opened the folder carefully. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, documents. She saw Richard in several photos, a stern-looking man with dark hair and a serious expression. And there was Helen, older now but still recognizable, standing beside him at various town events. In every photo, Helen wore the same expression, polite, distant, like she was there in body but not in spirit. Did they have children? Rachel asked. Yes, 2, a son and a daughter. Let me see. The woman flipped through some papers. David and Christine. Both would be in their 70s now if they're still alive. Rachel's heart skipped. Helen's children were still alive. They might remember their mother, might have stories about her. Is there anything about when Helen died? The woman pulled out a newspaper clipping. Here it is. 1987. She was 68 years old. The obituary says she died at home. The woman paused, reading something else. Oh, there's a letter to the editor here, published about 2 weeks after she passed. It's from her younger sister, Patricia Hartwell. Rachel leaned forward. What does it say? The woman adjusted her glasses and read aloud. My sister Helen lived a life of quiet dignity, but those who knew her well understood she carried a sorrow that no one could heal. She was more than what people saw on the surface, more than the dutiful wife and mother everyone expected her to be. May she finally find the peace that eluded her in this life. The words hung in the air. Rachel felt tears prickling her eyes. Patricia had known. Helen's sister had understood that she'd been living a lie, or at least not living her true life. "That's quite moving," the woman said softly. "Makes you wonder what sadness she was carrying, doesn't it?" Rachel wanted to tell her. She wanted to pull out the metal box and show her the letters, explain about James and the hidden love story. But something held her back. This was Helen's secret, and maybe it wasn't Rachel's place to share it yet. Not until she understood the full story. "Do you know what happened to her children? Do they still live around here?" The woman thought for a moment. "I believe Christine moved away years ago, but I'm not sure about David. Let me check our member directory. Sometimes descendants of old families keep in touch with us." She walked back to her desk and pulled out a different book. "Ah, here, Christine Pemberton Walker. She's actually a member. She lives at Riverside Senior Community. That's just 20 minutes from here." Rachel's pulse quickened. "Would it be okay if I contacted her? I found something in my house that belonged to her mother, and I think she'd want to have it." The woman smiled. "I think that would be lovely. I'm sure she'd appreciate it. We get people researching their family history all the time, and they're usually thrilled when someone finds old family items." She wrote down the address and phone number on a piece of paper. Rachel thanked her and left the Historical Society with the folder carefully copied and the contact information in her hand. She sat in her car for a few minutes, staring at Christine's information. Should she call first? Should she just show up? What would she even say? "Hi, I found your mother's secret love letters hidden under my floorboards." She decided to call. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed the number. It rang 3 times before someone answered. "Hello?" The voice was elderly but strong. "Hi. Is this Christine Pemberton Walker?" "Yes, this is she." Rachel took a deep breath. "My name is Rachel, and I live in the house where your mother used to live, on Maple Street. I found something hidden in the house, and I think it belonged to your mother. I was hoping I could talk to you about it." There was a long pause. "Hidden? What do you mean hidden?" "Under the floorboards in the master bedroom. It's a metal box with letters and personal items. Your mother's name is in some of them." Another pause, longer this time. When Christine spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost shaky. "Letters? What kind of letters?" "I think it would be better if we talked in person. Would you be willing to meet with me? I can bring everything to you." Christine was quiet for so long that Rachel thought the call had dropped. Then she heard a small sound, like a sob being held back. Yes, please come. Can you come today?" "Of course. I can be there in 30 minutes. I'll be in the main sitting room, just ask for me at the front desk." Rachel hung up and sat there for a moment, her heart pounding. Something in Christine's voice had told her everything she needed to know. Christine knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not the whole story, but she knew her mother had been keeping secrets. And after all these years, those secrets were finally going to come to light. Rachel started her car and carefully placed the metal box on the passenger seat. As she drove toward Riverside Senior Community, she thought about Helen one more time. Helen, who had hidden her true feelings for over 40 years. Helen, who had walked over that floorboard every single day, knowing what lay beneath it. Helen, who had lived the life everyone expected instead of the life she wanted. But maybe, Rachel thought, maybe this was what Helen had wanted all along. Maybe she'd hidden those letters not to forget, but to preserve them. Maybe she'd hoped that someday, somehow, someone would find them and tell her story. Maybe she'd wanted the truth to come out, just not in her lifetime. Well, today was that day. Today, Helen's daughter was going to learn who her mother really was, and Rachel was going to be the one to tell her. The drive to Riverside Senior Community felt both too long and too short at the same time. Rachel kept glancing at the metal box on her passenger seat, wondering how Christine would react. Finding out your mother had a whole secret life, a hidden love story that couldn't be easy, especially when that mother had been gone for over 30 years. The building was nicer than Rachel expected, modern and clean, with large windows and gardens out front. She parked and sat in her car for a minute, gathering her courage. This was it. She was about to change someone's understanding of their own mother. That was a big responsibility. Inside, the lobby was bright and welcoming. Soft music played from somewhere, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. A young woman at the front desk smiled at her. "I'm here to see Christine Walker," Rachel said, her voice sounding steadier than she felt. "Oh yes, she's expecting you. She's in the main sitting room, just down that hall to your left." Rachel followed, the directions clutching the metal box against her chest. The sitting room was spacious, with comfortable chairs arranged in small groups, bookshelves lining the walls, and more of those large windows letting in natural light. Several elderly residents were scattered around, some reading, some chatting quietly. And there, sitting in a chair by the window, was a woman who had to be Christine. She looked to be in her mid-70s with short gray hair and Helen's eyes. Those same eyes from the photograph. She was sitting very still, her hands folded, in her lap, watching the doorway like she'd been waiting there for hours. When their eyes met, Christine stood up slowly. Rachel walked over, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You're Rachel," Christine finally said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." Christine gestured to the chair across from her, and they both sat down. Christine's eyes went immediately to the metal box in Rachel's lap. "Is that it?" Rachel nodded. "Before I show you, I need to tell you something. What's in here, it's personal. Very personal. And it might change how you think about your mother." Christine's expression didn't change. "My mother was a mystery to me my entire life. She was there, she took care of us, she did all the things mothers are supposed to do. But I always felt like she was somewhere else in her mind, somewhere far away that none of us could reach." She paused, her voice getting softer. "So whatever you found, it can't make me think less of her. If anything, maybe it will help me understand her better." Rachel opened the box slowly. She took out the photograph first, the one of young Helen on the porch, and handed it to Christine. Christine's breath caught. Her hand trembled as she took the photo. "This is my mother, but I've never seen her look like this. So young. So." She trailed off, staring at the image. "Beautiful?" Rachel offered. "Alive," Christine whispered. "She looks alive. I don't think I ever saw her look this way in real life. Not once." Rachel pulled out the bundle of letters next. "These are from a soldier named James. They're love letters, written during World War II." Christine's eyes widened. She carefully set down the photograph and took the letters with shaking hands. She untied the old ribbon and began to read the first one. Rachel watched as tears started rolling down the older woman's cheeks. "She was in love with him," Christine said, her voice breaking. "She was in love with someone who wasn't my father." "Yes," Rachel said gently. "But there's more." She handed over the journal. Christine read through several pages, and with each one, more tears fell. But she didn't look angry or upset. She looked like someone who was finally seeing a picture that had been blurry their whole life come into focus. "He died," Christine said after a while. "This James, he died in the war. According to the journal, yes. He was listed as missing in action, presumed dead." Christine kept reading. When she got to the part about Richard finding out, about the confrontation, about Helen agreeing to marry him anyway, she closed the journal and just sat there, tears streaming down her face. "My father knew," she said. "He knew she loved someone else, and he married her anyway." Rachel didn't know what to say, so she just waited. "That explains so much," Christine continued. "The way they were with each other. They were polite, always polite. They never fought, never raised their voices. But they never, I don't know, they never seemed to really see each other either. Like they were two people living in the same house but in different worlds." She picked up the photograph again. "I used to watch my mother sometimes when she thought no one was looking. She'd stare out windows for hours. My brother David and I would ask her what she was thinking about, and she'd always smile and say, "Nothing important." But it was important. She was thinking about him, wasn't she? About James. About the life she could have had. "I think so," Rachel said softly. Christine opened the journal again and flipped to the last entry. She hid all of this under the floorboards in her bedroom in 1945 and never went back for it. "Maybe she couldn't," Rachel suggested. "Maybe it was too painful, or maybe your father wouldn't let her. My father died in 1988, just a year after my mother." Christine's voice was distant now, lost in memories. "After Mother passed, he sold the house so quickly. We barely had time to go through her things. And he was, I don't know how to describe it, almost frantic about getting rid of everything. He threw away boxes and boxes of her belongings. I tried to save some things, photos and such, but he insisted most of it had to go." Rachel felt a chill. He was destroying evidence, making sure no one would find out about James. Even after she was gone, he couldn't let her have that truth. Christine wiped her eyes with a tissue. "Do you know what's sad? I don't think my father was a bad man. He provided for us, he was involved in the community, he wasn't cruel. But I don't think he ever forgave my mother for loving someone else, and she spent her entire life paying for that." Rachel reached into the box one more time and pulled out the velvet pouch. "There's something else." Christine opened the pouch and the jewelry spilled into her palm. The rings, the brooch, the earrings, and then she saw the locket. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "That's him," Rachel said. "That's James." Christine stared at the photograph inside the locket for a long time. "He was handsome, and he looks kind. You can see it in his eyes." She looked up at Rachel with red, swollen eyes. "My mother loved this man, really loved him, and she had to hide it away for 40 years. 42 years, Rachel corrected gently. From 1945 until she died in 1987. Christine closed the locket and held it in her fist, pressed against her heart. "I wish she'd told me. I wish she'd trusted me enough to share this. Maybe she wanted to protect you, or maybe the pain was too deep to talk about. Or maybe," Christine said, her voice stronger now, "maybe she was afraid of what people would think. It was a different time. Women didn't have the choices we have now. She probably thought she was doing the right thing, the responsible thing, marrying my father and staying with him." They sat in silence for a while. Other residents passed by, some glancing curiously at the two women with the old box between them. Finally, Christine spoke again. "You know what I remember most about my mother? She used to hum sometimes when she was doing housework, just quietly to herself. But it was always the same song. I never knew what it was, some old tune from her youth. But now I wonder if it was their song, hers and James's. Something that reminded her of him." She carefully gathered all the letters and put them back in the box. She held the photograph of young Helen for a moment longer before adding that too. But she kept the locket in her hand. "Can I keep this?" she asked. "The locket?" "Of course," Rachel said. "It all belongs to you, all of it." "No," Christine shook her head. "The letters, the journal, they should stay with the house. With you. My mother hid them there for a reason. Maybe she knew that someday someone would find them, someone who would care enough to find out her story." She looked at Rachel with something like gratitude. "Someone like you? Are you sure?" "I'm sure. But I'd like to keep the locket and maybe one letter, just to have something of hers, something real. The mother I knew was just a shell. This," she held up the locket, "this is who she really was." Rachel nodded, understanding. Christine stood up, and Rachel did too. The older woman surprised her by pulling her into a hug. "Thank you," Christine whispered. "Thank you for giving me back my mother. The real one, even if I only get to know her now, after she's gone." As Rachel drove home that afternoon, the box lighter now with just the letters and journal inside, she thought about Helen again, about how many people live lives they don't choose, keeping their true selves hidden away like treasures under floorboards, about how love doesn't die just because it's inconvenient or impossible. And she thought about Christine, finally understanding her mother after all these years, finally seeing the woman behind the sad smile, the person who had loved deeply and lost everything, but had somehow kept going anyway. Sometimes the most shocking discoveries aren't about what we find, they're about understanding that the people we think we know are often carrying stories we can't even imagine. Rachel couldn't stop thinking about Christine's face when she'd opened that locket, The way her whole expression had changed, like she was seeing her mother for the first time. It had been 3 days since their meeting, and Rachel found herself going back to the metal box again and again, reading Helen's words, trying to understand the woman who had lived in her house for so many years. On the 4th day, her phone rang. It was Christine. "I hope I'm not bothering you," Christine said, her voice warm but hesitant. "Not at all. Is everything okay?" "More than okay. I wanted to tell you something. After you left the other day, I called my brother David. I told him everything. About the letters, about James, about Mother's secret." Christine paused. "He cried. My brother is 73 years old, and I heard him cry for the first time since we were children." Rachel felt her own throat tighten. "How did he take it?" "He said it explained everything. He remembered things I'd forgotten, like how Mother would sometimes touch her collarbone, right where a necklace would sit even though she wasn't wearing one, or how she'd freeze whenever certain songs came on the radio. He said he always knew something was missing in her, some piece of her that wasn't there. Now he knows what it was. I'm glad you told him. That's not why I called, though." Christine's voice brightened slightly. "David did some research. He has a friend who's good with computers and military records. He looked up James." Rachel's heart started beating faster. "And his full name was James Michael Donovan. He was from Connecticut, enlisted in 1942. He was part of the D-Day invasion in 1944. Christine took a breath. "He was killed in action in December 1945, just outside a small village in France. He's buried in the Normandy American Cemetery." Rachel sat down heavily in her kitchen chair, the same chair where she'd first opened the metal box. So Helen was right. He really did die. Yes, but here's the thing. David's friend found something else. James wrote letters home to his mother, and in one of them, dated just a week before he died, he wrote about Helen. He told his mother that when the war was over, he was going to come home and marry the girl he loved. He even wrote her name. Rachel felt tears streaming down her face. He never stopped loving her either. No, he died still planning their future together, not knowing she thought he was already gone. Not knowing she'd agreed to marry someone else? Christine's voice cracked. They both lost each other, but in different ways. They talked for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. After hanging up, Rachel went upstairs to the bedroom. She stood looking at the spot where the loose floorboard had been. She'd nailed it back down properly now, but she knew she'd never walk across that floor again without thinking about what had been hidden there. Later that week, Christine called again with an unexpected request. "I've been thinking," she said. "I want to do something for my mother. Something she never got to do. I want to tell people her story. Not everyone, just family. David and I are planning a small gathering. We want to share the letters with our children, with Mother's grandchildren. They should know who she really was." "That sounds beautiful. We'd like you to be there too. You're part of this story now. You found her secret and treated it with respect. You gave her back to us. Please come." Rachel agreed, and 2 weeks later she found herself in Christine's living room surrounded by Helen's family. There were about 15 people, ranging from Christine and David down to Helen's great-grandchildren. Teenagers who'd never even met her. Christine had framed the photograph of young Helen on the porch, and it sat on the mantel above the fireplace. She'd also made copies of some of the letters, the ones that were most beautiful and least painful. "Our mother lived a life of duty," Christine began, standing in front of her family. "She was a good mother, a respectable wife, a pillar of the community. But we never really knew her. Not the real her. Not until Rachel found these letters. She told them the story. About James, about the war, about the love that couldn't be. About Helen's choice to marry Richard. About the secret she kept for over 40 years. As she spoke, Rachel watched the faces in the room. Some looked shocked, some sad. Some seemed to understand something they'd never quite grasped before. When Christine finished, David stood up. "I want to read something," he said, holding one of James's letters. "This is what real love sounds like." He read aloud, his voice shaking slightly. "My dearest Helen, I dream about the life we'll have together. A little house with a garden where you can grow those roses you love. Children running in the yard. Sunday mornings sleeping late with you in my arms. Growing old together. Sitting on the porch and watching the sunset. I carry this dream with me through every dark moment. It's what keeps me going. You're what keeps me going." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. One of Helen's granddaughters, a woman in her 40s, raised her hand timidly. "Can I say something?" "Of course," Christine nodded. "I always thought Grandma was, I don't know, cold maybe? Distant?" I felt bad thinking that, but she never seemed fully present, you know? Like she was always somewhere else in her head. The woman wiped her eyes. "Now I understand. She was somewhere else. She was with him. With James. Even though he was gone, part of her never left him." An older grandson spoke up. "My grandfather, Richard, he was stern. Really strict. I used to think he was just old-fashioned, but now I wonder if he was angry. Angry that he never really had his wife's heart, even though they were married for 40 years. He was human," Christine said softly. "He made choices too. He could have let her go, but he didn't. He chose to keep her, knowing she loved someone else. I don't know if that was love or pride or fear of being alone, maybe all three." Rachel listened as Helen's family talked about her for hours, seeing her in a new light. They shared memories that made sense now. The way Helen would go quiet during patriotic songs. How she'd insisted on visiting Washington, D.C. once and stood at the World War II memorial for over an hour. How she'd kept a single rose bush in the garden that she tended obsessively, even when everything else was neglected. As the evening wound down, Christine's daughter pulled out her phone. "I looked up the Normandy cemetery where James is buried. They have a website. You can find the graves." She scrolled for a moment. "Here he is. James Michael Donovan. Plot C, row 15, grave 23. Christine looked at the small picture on the phone screen. White crosses stretching into the distance, the Atlantic Ocean in the background. "Do you think she ever knew where he was buried?" "I doubt it," David said. "She probably never even knew for sure that he'd died. Just missing, presumed dead. No closure. No grave to visit, nothing." "That makes it worse somehow," one of the grandchildren said. "Not knowing for certain. Always wondering." Christine stood up and walked to the mantel. She picked up the framed photograph of young Helen. "I've decided something. Next spring, David and I are going to France. We're going to visit James's grave. We're going to bring flowers and tell him about our mother. Tell him that she never forgot him, that she kept his letters safe, that she loved him until the day she died." "That's beautiful, Mom," her daughter said. "And we're going to take this picture and have a copy placed in the cemetery archive, so he won't be alone there, so in some way they can finally be together." Rachel felt her heart might burst. This was what Helen had needed. Not just for her story to be told, but for someone to honor the love she'd had to hide. For someone to bridge the distance between her and James, even if only symbolically. As Rachel drove home that night, she thought about how one loose floorboard had changed everything. Not just for her, but for an entire family. Helen's grandchildren and great-grandchildren would grow up knowing their grandmother had been more than what she seemed. They'd know she'd loved deeply, sacrificed greatly, and carried her grief with quiet dignity. The next morning, Rachel did something she'd been thinking about for weeks. She took one of James's letters, one where he wrote about the house they'd have and the roses in the garden, and she framed it. She hung it in her bedroom, right near where the loose floorboard had been. Then she went outside to the garden center and bought 3 rose bushes. She planted them in the front yard, near the porch where young Helen had stood in that photograph. Red roses, the kind that bloom year after year. She didn't know if Helen had ever planted roses there, but it didn't matter. These roses were for Helen and James both. For the love they'd shared and lost. For the life they'd dreamed about but never got to live. As Rachel watered the newly planted roses, she thought about all the hidden stories in the world. All the secrets buried under floorboards, tucked away in attics, locked in old trunks. All the people who lived lives they didn't choose. Who loved people they couldn't have, who kept going even when their hearts were broken. Helen's story was just one of millions. But it mattered. It mattered to Christine and David and all their children. It mattered because it was real and true and human. And now, instead of being hidden in darkness under a floorboard, Helen's love story was out in the light where it belonged. Where it had always deserved to be. Sometimes the most shocking thing we can discover isn't treasure or money or secrets that change the world. Sometimes it's simply the truth about a human heart. And that, Rachel thought as she looked at the roses, that might be the most valuable discovery of all.